In order to 100% Game Dev Tycoon, I'm going to need to sell 100 million copies of a game, create the perfect video game by having a review score of 10 across the board, as well as make a game that exceeds a 10 review and gets an 11. I have a gaping hole inside me that can only be filled by millions of adoring fans, and also millions and millions of dollars. Will I be able to finally find my true self-worth? Welcome to my 100% playthrough of Game Dev Tycoon. The game starts by informing me that in this business simulation, I've been transported back in time, apparently by way of my friendly neighborhood DeLorean, to create my very own video game company. Over the course of the next 35 years, we'd have the opportunity to make the video game development company of our dreams. After naming myself, I moved on to naming our company. We need a company name. Should we be called Nubisoft? We then picked out our clothes. Should we go with the Gru fit? After picking our shirt, we gave ourselves a full head of blonde hair, exactly like I have in real life. As soon as we finalized our character, we got our first achievement. I was soon made aware of the fact that time was ticking and bills had to be paid. If I wanted to make bread, I had to make games. I started developing our very first video game. The process of making a game involved picking a topic for the game as well as the genre and the platform the game would be sold on. You can obviously name it as well. For our first game, I decided to make a dystopian adventure game on the PC. And you know that 2D side-scroller Limbo? Well, get ready for Jimbo. Moving on in the process, we had to pick the graphics for the game. We went with 2D graphics for Jimbo, and development began. In Game Dev Tycoon, game development runs through 3 stages that each involve these sliders. The sliders basically represent the focus you put on each category. The actual making of the game is shown as those little colored bubbles flying from my computer there. The bubbles fly to either research, technology, design, or bugs that could then be worked through at the end of development before we released the game. After some bubbles had flown, we hit stage 2 of development. And then, not long after that, stage 3. Once development was done on our game, we were able to start working through the bugs that had shown up. After getting through the bugs, we were presented with a page that let us see what and how much we improved by making the game. We then released Jimbo. We didn't have to wait long for the first reviews for Jimbo to come in. Overall, it was, shall we say, less than mid. After we saw the reviews, I was able to generate a game report for Jimbo. Game reports give you information on how to improve the games you make. Information that tells you what sorts of game combinations do well and which ones don't, where to put the sliders when making certain games, stuff like that. As we were working on Jimbo's game report, we got word that the game sold 1,942 units in its first week on the market. And with those sales, we made 9 whole fans. Self-worth? Here we come. We finished Jimbo's game report. We would be making many game reports over the course of this game. I decided to research a new topic for us to make games about. Movies was the obvious way to go here. Now, I had thought that once we made a game, it'd just chill out there in the market, making us passive bread as time went on. Yes, it may not be as much as initial release, but it'd still be bringing in something. Well, that's not how it works. I soon learned that games do indeed get taken off the market after a time. MMO games are an exception to this rule, but that'll come later in the video. Jimbo made us almost $45,000. After finishing our research, we started on our next game. Life of Stan was going to blow up. As we went throughout the game, we were presented with various pieces of gaming history that would give us new options when it came to making our games. If a new console was released, we could then obviously make a game on said console, provided we pay for a sometimes expensive license. As one might imagine, the market was also affected by the emergence of these consoles as they came. As we were releasing our Life of Stan game, we were in the hole financially. It was okay though, because Life of Stan would hit. It didn't hit. As a matter of fact, we even lost a fan. It was probably Stan himself. I made a game report for Life of Stan and then got into making our third game. It's easy to remember that it was our third game because I neglected to give the game an actual name. So game number 3 was its governmental birth name. As we finished game number 3, we actually got the achievement for making a game with a good topic / genre combo. It actually took for the dang reviews to come in for me to realize that I forgot to name it. The first reviews for our newly released game. Game number 3, I didn't name the game. Game number 3 was quite mid, but still did better than Life of Stan. So, you know how we researched the movie topic earlier? We can research quite a few things other than just topics. And in order to do any of that research, you need, you guessed it, I'm just kidding, research points. So, using our research points, we researched custom game engines next. As we were researching, game number 3 was pulling us out of our crippling debt. Something else that would help us in the way of avoiding crippling debt was contract work. We could do some work for somebody else that would net us a little cash that could float us a bit. As we were working on our first contract job, we learned that game number 3 made us 76 grand. We finished our contract job and made $11,000 more dollars. I then started work on our next game, Mid Theft Auto. After that, I did more contract work. Mid Theft Auto eventually came off the market after making us only $20,000. Not great. I started on our next game, game number 3.5. We were desperate for cash when we released game number 3.5. Although it was still mid, it was kinda decent as far as the critics were concerned. It was at this point that I decided to make our first game engine. This is how it would go in the game. You'd research a new feature you could put in games, like mono sound. You would then need to make a new game engine and include that mono sound feature in order to start using it in games. For our first game engine, have you heard of Unreal or Unity? Try Painfully Real. As we were working away on our Painfully Real game engine, we learned that game number 3.5 made us over $151,000. Being our most profitable game to date. We finished our game engine and started our next game, making it with our Painfully Real game engine. Crash Bandicoot was underway. As we were making Crash Bandicoot, we learned some of what game reports can give us. See those little plus signs? Those show that gameplay is pretty important for action crime games. If there were 3 plus signs, that'd mean it was very important. On the other hand, if there were minus signs, that'd mean that specific area was not important. We released Crash Bandicoot and it was received about the same as our other games. After we saw the reviews, we heard from the bank, which is never like a good time. We were over the debt amount allowed, and so the bank offered that we could either go bankrupt right then and there, or we could accept $73.3 thousand, but would then need to pay it all back along with a $25,000 fee in 2 months' time. I took the deal. I did a little contract work, then got to work on our next game. I needed a cash cow in this time of need. Cash Wolf number 1 was the answer. Luckily, during this time, we had Crash Bandicoot on the market making us money. So with that, along with the bank loan, we had a semi-decent amount in the bank. But before we could even release Cash Wolf 1, the bank came for their money. Almost 100K later, and I didn't owe them any money anymore, but I was very much in the red. We released Cash Wolf 1, and it was one of our best reviewed games so far. Luckily, Cash Wolf 1 lived up to its name. We ultimately made $140,000 from the game. We started on our next game, and thanks to researching target audience, we could now rate our games. We start to make what very well could have been the very first rated M game in history. Blue's Clues. Ironically, Steve wanted an interview. I accepted. From the results of the interview, it sounded like we were a hair ahead of when mature games would really pop off. We released Blue's Clues. It wasn't received super well. On top of that, we had our first failed contract job not long after. We still had over 200 fans though, so I needed a win and moved forward with Cash Wolf 2. We released it to decent reviews. We continued making game reports. Cash Wolf 2 ends up making us close to 200,000 bans. We made our next game, Crime Spotter, and released it. It was a decent game. At this point, our fan base had grown to close to 500 strong. I received a proposition from one Agent Blowfish fish that if I sent him $5,000, his agents would give me some information they happened to procure. I declined. I decided to make our next game, and this game was a mature crime simulation game called Off the Rails. On the data page, we got a new record for both design and technology, which is always a good thing. That's what you want to shoot for, actually. I didn't know that at the time, but it's true. The reviews came in. Off the Rails broke a record for the company, selling over 50,000 units. We now had over $500,000 chilling in the bank, and the number was growing. Off the Rails soon sold over 100,000 units. And shortly after that, we crossed $1 million in the bank, baby. Finally, something I could be proud of. Once we hit 1 mil, we were given the option to move to a new office for $150,000. But I held off, sticking in the garage a little longer. Since we had a lovely safety net now, I wanted to crank out as much research as we could. Off the Rails eventually left the market, having made us over $1.5 million all by itself. I continued researching until I couldn't research anything else due to being low on research points. I then made our next game engine, the Faux Real game engine. Making the game engine paid off because when we finished the Faux Real engine, we got our next achievement for investing over 100,000 bones in a new game engine. Not long after that, I was considering what to call our next game when yet another achievement came through. So that worked out. We ended up calling the game The Dangerous Path. It too broke records from a data standpoint, but it was a fairly mid game according to the reviews. What we learned from the Dangerous Path's game report was that expedition and adventure was a good combination. And something I didn't know at the time was that we needed great combos to make the best games, and not just good combinations. I decided to greenlight Off the Rails 2. We released it. It too was a banger, and with that I decided it was time to move to the new office. Our new building was quite the step up from the garage. We had our name on the building, a huge table for my staff, which I could soon begin to hire, a corkboard, a water cooler. With the previously mentioned perks of the new office came the ability to train myself. I decided to train myself in staff management so I could begin to build out the team. I went and moved forward with the hiring process for our first employee. As we were searching for the new hire, we learned that Off the Rails 2 made $1.6 million. Once we were done searching for candidates, we were given some options to choose from for the first employee of Nubisoft. I decided to hire Eric because his skills with technology and design were pretty evenly split. As soon as we hired him, we were able to research medium games. Up to this point, we were only making small games. I gave Eric some welcome training. We started on our next game, which was going to have a truly inspired name, Star Walls. We finished the game and it was received very well. With Eric in the building, we were able to double the research, which was great. It wasn't long before we were invited to participate in the biggest game convention on the planet, G3, which was short for Games. Hot on the heels of Star Wars, I decided to make Space Trek. As we were finishing Space Trek, I was presented with the opportunity to buy a spot at G3. Having a booth at G3 would help us get fans, as well as market the games we were making. I went with a medium booth, which was $500,000. I released Space Trek. It was terrible. What I would learn is that one should not make games that are similar close to each other. At the very least, without trying to train your employees and try to improve on things. So I had Star Wars, and right after that, Space Trek. Didn't go well. G3 came, and unfortunately, we only had our two very similar space games to show. Close to 70,000 people showed up to our booth at G3, which wasn't terrible. We were now a decent bit below $1 million again though, which wasn't great. Eric thought our office could use an upgrade in the security department and asked for 50 bands. I gave it to him. I decided to make another Cash Wolf, and during the development of Cash Wolf 3, I learned about marketing. Marketing is something that can increase the hype for the game you're currently working on. It can help or actually hurt the game, depending on if it's a good game or not. For Cash Wolf 3, I went with magazines and demos. We released the game. It was decent. We made Off the Rails 3, and it was yet another banger. With Off the Rails 3, we got our next achievement. If I'm honest, I'm not entirely sure what needed to happen specifically for us to get this achievement, but it's done. We got it. We made stinking cheese with Off the Rails 3, man. Off the Rails 3 got us another achievement. When we sold 500,000 copies of the game without the help of a publisher, we were now sitting at close to $4 million in the bank, with close to 7,000 fans. Things were looking up. I had Eric start on our next game engine, the Otis game engine. Off the Rails 3 ended up making us over $4 million. We finished making the Otis. We eventually started our next game, The Perilous Journey. It was pretty mid. We tried to make a new sort of game for us, Slapstick Mayhem, a casual comedy game. Before the reviews came in, Eric let me know that quite a few players were using illegal copies of the game. I could either sue them or just warn them. I decided to go the more peaceful route and warn them. The reviews for Slapstick Mayhem came back and they weren't great. Weren't terrible, but weren't great. Due to us warning our game pirates though and not suing them, we gained 276 fans. We decided to make our next game, which was going to be a totally original IP, Ninja's Creed. After releasing the game, Eric came to me with another proposition, that we renovate the office. I said yes to the $150K, not fully knowing what that meant. We now had beanbag chairs, a flat screen TV, a water cooler. The reviews for Ninja's Creed came in, and let's just say, we'd be making more of them. If you are not a fan of Ubisoft now, then chances are you will be after playing their latest hit, Ninja's Creed, said very nice Andrew McNara from Game Informant. We decided to make Slapstick Mayhem 2, but before we really started on the game, Eric came to me yet again, and this time I heard his voice.
I've discovered that some really dedicated fans of Off the Rails have created a fan.
I let them be, which helped us get 737 more fans. The reviews for Slapstick Mayhem 2 came in and it wasn't fantastic. We were making our next game, Socialization, when somebody from Electric Games wanted an interview. I decided to be modest about our game and not hype it up. The game didn't do super well. However, we got the best numbers we had ever had at G3, so that was good. We made a game called Mafia Boss that slapped. It was around this time that the Play System 2 was announced, as well as the M-Box from Mercanoft. We released a game called Silvereye, which didn't do super hot. After that, we made a brand new game, Off the Rails 4, but it was the worst reviewed Off the Rails game we made to date. I decided to try and do a reboot of our Cash Wolf franchise with The Cash Wolf, and it was mid. We decided to make a spy game called In the Shadows. This game was our first medium-sized game. Medium games introduced the idea of needing to assign developers, me and Eric, to specific tasks. I had to be mindful of how much I was working each person. Later in development, Eric came to me and asked for $90K to sponsor an organization that one of his friends was involved with. I gave him the money. The reviews came in for In the Shadows, and they were alright. Slapstick Mayhem 3 came down the pipes, and after we finished it, we got our next achievement because I had reached level 5. The reviews came in, and it hit. We started making Ninja's Creed 2. In the Shadows left the market after being on the market longer than any of our previous games. The bigger the game, the longer it was on the market. Ninja's Creed 2 was not great. Our next game was a dungeon RPG called Angel Souls. We were trying to release Angel Souls when the market was trending towards RPG games, but just as we were about to finish it, the market, no. Before we could release it, the market went back to normal. The game was not fantastic, but it wasn't terrible either. Not long after Angel Souls left the market, somebody came to me. They wanted to invest $2.5 million in Ubisoft, and all I had to do was give $120K in order to get a verification confirmation from the bank. I declined the offer. I started making our next game engine, The Delusion. I then learned that I was wise in not giving that $120K. What we got? It appears recently that if you come with After that, we got our next achievement from investing over $500,000 into a new game engine. We started our first horror game. We called it The Woods. We released The Woods and then started another game off the rip. We started a comedy game called Seven Stooges the Game, a clear banger. The reviews came in for The Woods and they were fairly decent. I didn't know this at the time, but what features I included in the game actually had an impact on the game. See that percentage right there? You do not want to see a percentage there at all. The lower the percentage was, the worse the game was because of all the features I was cramming in. Like I said, I didn't know that yet, but hey, now you know. After we finished Seven Stooges the Game, the reviews came in for that game as well. 9s across the board. Seven Stooges the Game made the news. After that, we made a post-apocalyptic game called After the Bombs. We finished After the Bombs and started off the Rails 5. After the Bombs, bombed hard. We were making Off the Rails 5 when we encountered our first bugs post full release. After the Bombs had bugs that needed to be fixed. I had Eric patch the game while I continued work on Off the Rails 5. The reviews came in for Off the Rails 5 and clearly the franchise had lost its luster. Despite releasing some games recently that, to say the least, left a bit to be desired, we made the news since we patched After the Bombs. So that was a good thing in the midst of this mid at best crud. I researched the ability to put our games on multiple platforms. We decided to make a bit of a spin-off of our Cash Wolf franchise and make a game called Currency Canine, and it was going to be on both the PS2 and the PC. We hyped the game. We released the game. It was fairly decent. I did a sequel to Angel Souls called Light Souls. I finished it and then started another game right after it called On Set. It was a movie game. The reviews came back for Light Souls and they were pretty good. At this point, we were sitting at around $3 million in the bank with 33.8 thousand fans. While this was good, I needed more. We released On Set and started working on Lord of the Earrings. We then gave away the source code for our faux real game engine, which gained us 1.2 thousand fans. We then released Lord of the Earrings, a space game called Gulaga, Seven Stooges The Final Slap, a new sports game called Wii Sports, Light Souls 2, and paid $200,000 to install solar panels for our building. We then made Ninja's Creed 3, which was a medium game by accident, which made it super expensive to get off the ground initially. We were way low on money at this point, down to $190,000. And as we were working on the game, we caught wind that the PS2 was going to be taken off the market in 2 months, which was very bad news because Ninja's Creed 3 was supposed to release on the PS2. Before we could finish the game, we were way in the red financially. The bank eventually gave us an offer when we got too deep in the hole. They offered to give us $842,000, but we would need to give them a hair over $1.5 million in a year. I took the deal. We released Ninja's Creed 3, and the PS2 was taken off the market immediately after. The reviews weren't great for Ninja's Creed 3. We then made Wii Sports, Gulaga 2, In the Shadows 2, and we had started making Slapstick Mayhem 4 when the bank came and took their money, leaving us with under $100,000 in the bank. We didn't stay that way for long, thankfully, being as we were actively selling In the Shadows 2, but still. After SM4, we made a new dungeon game with dwarves called Dungeon Dwarves. And after that game, we made our newest game engine called The Gamble. Luckily though, The Gamble did pay off in some way because we got our next achievement after finishing it. We invested over $1 million in that crud. We then made a new game called To Save a Ship because that's what it needed to do for Newbisoft. We soon were in the hole nearly $500,000. The bank showed up. This time, the bank offered to give us $1.4 million, but we would then need to pay back nearly $2.5 million in a year's time. I took the deal. We released To Save a Ship, Luckily, it was a fairly good game. We then made a spy game called Cloak and Badger, which was received decently well. We then made yet another new game called Swindler's Rest. At this point, I was desperate to make games just to make money, because the idea of the bank taking their nearly $2.5 million was looming over me. Before the reviews came in for Swindler's Rest, I greenlit our next game called Time Takers. Swindler's Rest was a good game critically speaking, which then put my mind at ease with regards to the bank. After finishing Time Takers, the market at that time was trending towards strange combinations for games. So I tried to make a government RPG called The Last Juror. The reviews for Time Takers came in, and they were pretty decent. As we were making The Last Juror, the bank took their money, leaving us with a bit over $2.5 million ourselves, which was not bad at all. We finished The Last Juror and released it before the market went back to normal, which was a good thing. Despite the trend in the market though, the reviews were only alright, not fantastic. At this point, we had 26% of the achievements. We had 26 achievements left to achieve. We had over 4 million in the bank with close to 60,000 fans. I must have more. I started looking for another employee. I wanted to hire somebody who was heavy on the technology side of things. I hired Joseph Chapman. Unfortunately, I entirely forgot about the welcome training that Eric did, so literally every other employee in this entire video besides Eric just has to settle in on their own with no help from me. After doing a bunch of research, we started on our next game, a strategy colonization game called Hearts of Steel 1. The game would go on to sell over 500k and would help us get over 5 mil for the first time. We then made a crime game called The Kingpin, and as soon as we released it, we got our next achievement. We had a successful game in each of the 5 main genres. The Kingpin would also go on to sell over 500k. We had back-to-back bangers, baby. Look at the dough we had. And we were approaching 100,000 fans. We started working on Cash Wolf 5, and for the first time, we got a large booth at G3. Also, for the first time, we actually made the top 100 attractions at the conference, coming in at 97 with a bit over 500,000 people showing up to our booth. We released Cash Wolf 5 and got solid 9s. Cash Wolf 5 helped us get our next achievement. We sold 1 million copies of a game without the help of a publisher. We then hired yet another person to the team. This person was design focused. We hired Heather Haley. Hiring Heather actually helped us get 2 different achievements. One for having a male and female staff, and the other for hiring a famous person. I guess Heather was famous. You can't actually influence when that second achievement happens, so I'm glad it happened when it did. It had been at least a month since Eric asked for money, so he came up and asked for $90,000 for air conditioning. I went with it, but he must have picked air conditioners with gold interiors, because that's the crud we got. $90,000, and we couldn't get central air for one big room. We then got back to making games. We made a horror game called Until Dusk, and when the game was selling, Eric approached me with an interesting proposition. I wanted to hold off on moving. I hired Kathy Brewer onto the team. She was good at technology like Joe was, and just like that, the table was full. We then went back to one of our franchises that was super successful in the past, Off the Rails. We made Off the Rails 6, even though the last couple games in the franchise weren't super great. The point of this game was to try and hit the market trend. It was trending towards simulation games. However, before we even released the game, the market went back to normal, leaving us out to dry with Off the Rails 6. But before the reviews came in, Eric asked me again about moving, and this time I listened. We moved to our brand new office. Take a look at our brand new office. We had a Super Meat Boy figurine, a vending machine, a water cooler. Our employees now had triple monitor setups. The reviews came in for Off the Rails, and it was a good game. After that, Eric came to me and mentioned opening up our own research and development department. In order for us to do that though, we would need to have both a technology specialist and a design specialist, which we did not have at that point. So the R&D department had to wait. We now had over 20 mil in the bank with over 100,000 fans, and I started to feel something. But you know what? I wanted more. We made a music game called Jazz Band, an alien game called Galaxy Quest, and then I was approached by a guy named Dave Johnson. He was wondering if I would be interested in some product placement, and was wondering if I'd put his red exploding barrels in one of our games. If we did, he'd pay us $200,000. I took the deal. We then made a mystery adventure game called The Glass Cabbage, and then before the reviews came in, we started on our next game engine. I called it the Rollin' Deep engine. The reviews came in for The Glass Cabbage, and they weren't great. The new engine took a minute to finish, but once we did finish the Rollin' Deep engine, we started a new game with it. We called it Plants vs. Vampires. After the game came out to lackluster reviews, we researched a bunch of new topics. After we had researched those topics, we went for another achievement and made Game Dev Tycoon within Game Dev Tycoon. After the reviews came through, so did the achievement. We then started looking for somebody to fill one of those 2 empty desks we had since moving into the new office. After that, we started on our next game, which was a military game called Call of War, and we included the red exploding barrels in this one. Early in the development process, we hired Christina Jackson, who was really good with design. After Call of War sold for a bit, Dave Johnson showed up and gave me some cake for putting the barrels in our game, getting us our next achievement. After we got the achievement, Christina came up and asked if we could stage an internal coding contest, with the prize being a cool $90,000 that would then go to charity. I gave the okay for that idea, and we all started on the contest. I started looking for our final Ubisoft developer, and before long, Sean Lynch was added to the team, getting us another achievement for having the maximum number of employees. Remember that coding contest that I okayed? Thanks for agreeing to the coding contest. It was a big success. Stryvver won the contest. I'm happy to crown the winner of this contest. It's me. After sending the employees on vacation, which they need from time to time, and training some people, we started making a new farming sim called Honeydew Valley. Honeydew Valley, it did all right. We racked up dough quick with the game. It pushed us over $100 million. We then made Cyber Hunt, which was our best reviewed game in a while. I was hoping for 10s across the board, but what we got was still great. Not long after the reviews came out, we got our next achievement for selling 10 million copies of a game without the help of a publisher. Cyber Hunt was going crazy. We had over $200 million. After we did some research, I got an invitation. You remember at the beginning of the game how it said over the course of the next 35 years? It was year 35. We tried to squeeze in one more game before the end of the year. And what better game than another Cash Wolf game, Cash Wolf 6. It was our first large game. We literally used up just about every ounce of time we had left before the end of the year making Cash Wolf 6. We finished it during the last week of November, and we released it in December. Our final game got 3 10s, which was fantastic, despite it not being clean 10s. Right as the new year struck, the Worldwide Game Developers Guild awarded me the Lifetime Achievement Award for contributions to the game industry. We could and would continue playing the game into and after year 36, but we were given some statistics for the main story of the game, if you will. And at the end of that, we got another achievement for finishing the game. After receiving my Lifetime Achievement Award about halfway through year 36, we were sitting at over $500 million with over 450,000 fans. It felt good, but more. I must have more. We went to G3, and for the first time ever, we were voted the #1 booth for that year. Over 1.5 million people showed up to our booth. We got to making our next game, which was a surgery simulator game called Operation. And for this game, I decided to hype the game in an interview. Unfortunately, the game was subpar at best, and my hype during the interview came back to bite me. Never again did I hype a game during an interview. I then made Super Meat Boy in an effort to get an achievement, but alas, no achievement was gained from it. We then made Journey for the same reason we made Super Meat Boy, but just like Super Meat Boy, we didn't get any achievement for making it. When Journey was still still on the market, we trained Joe to become our tech specialist for a meager $5 million. Remember that R&D department we could make after we had a tech and design specialist? We were getting closer to that. We had been training Joe and Heather for this purpose. I didn't realize this until editing this video, but you don't actually need the tech specialist for the R&D lab. You just need the design one. So, rip. We then made a fantasy RPG called Rim Sky. It didn't quite have the impact as its real-world counterpart. Suffice it to say, after researching the thief topic, we had all of the topics unlocked, which was a good feeling. No achievement was involved, but hey, still felt nice. We then made a fighting game called Road Fighter, a game called Prison Designer, did some easy contract work to make some research points, and trained Heather in the design department. We then made a hacking game called Watch Wolves, and then, after we finished our next game, a zombie game called The Jogging Dead, we got our next achievement when I reached level 10. Our next game was Ninja's Creed 4 Gray Flag, for absolutely no particular reason. When Gray Flag was selling, we made our next game engine. It was called the Endgame game engine. Our next game was a thief game made with the Endgame game engine called Robber's Cause. As we were making Robber's Cause, we received a letter from a company called All Your IP Belongs to Us, and they said that our Endgame game engine was infringing on one of their patents. They offered to slide us a license for a cool 35 mil if we didn't fight them in court. I decided to sick our fans on them, and our fans came through. Not only did we make All Your IP Belongs to Us back off, but we also won over 14,000 fans in the process. After we finished our next game, a cooking game called Undercooked, we finally were able to train Heather to become our design specialist. And once she was done training, Heather let me know that we could open up our own R&D lab for $2.5 million. I took the deal, and our lab was installed. Here's how our R&D lab worked. As long as we pumped money into it each month, we'd be able to research things we wouldn't be able to otherwise, organize our very own convention like G3, and set up specialized marketing campaigns for AAA games. And as long as there was funding, the lab would also generate research points passively. Just always be pumping them out if you don't have them working on something. All good things aside from the fact that it cost $3 million a month to have it going at peak efficiency. At this point in time, that wasn't an issue though. After the organizing of our first ever Nubisoft convention was finished, I discovered that people had moved into the new lab. The characters in the lab did not fit any stereotypes whatsoever. We then made a transport simulator called Commute Architect. Arguably the most boring name I came up with the entire time I played this game. We then started making a cyberpunk game called Cyberpunk 3077. Before we finished it, we had our first ever Nubisoft convention, and over 2 million people showed up. Over 2 million people showed up to our convention, but we only had a bit over 650,000 fans. Seems to be a bit of a disconnect there. At this point in the game, I was most worried about making a game with a clean 10 set of reviews, but little did I know what other challenges I would face. After releasing Cyberpunk 3077, our lab eventually finished researching AAA games for us, meaning we could make games even larger than large games. And speaking of AAA games, our next game was going to be our first AAA game, Honeydew Valley 2. We dumped millions of dollars into the marketing for this game, but it didn't do so hot on the review board. It was at this point that I wanted to tackle some other quick achievements that we had to do outside of Nubisoft. I started a new company and called it Greenheart Games to get the achievement Admirer. I then started another company and called it Bethesda to get the Fan achievement. After getting those achievements, I then went back to Nubisoft and made a new game engine off the rip. We called it Brainwave. I was trying to get more research points by making the engine, but making it wasn't as fruitful in the research points department as I thought. After making the game engine, I tried doing some publisher deals in an effort to net a bigger number of fans than we'd be able to get by ourselves. A publisher deal meant that the publisher could dictate certain aspects about the next game we would make. And something else about publisher deals is that if the game we made did not perform like the publisher wanted, there was a financial penalty penalty on our end. I picked a publisher deal and we started making the game. A detective game we'd call Sherlock Holmes. Before we finished Sherlock Holmes, our lab finished researching MMO games. We were one step closer to making our first ever MMO. MMO games would play an integral role in us gaining one of the most difficult achievements this game has to offer. We released Sherlock Holmes and the reviews lived up to what the publishers wanted. So that was good. No penalty there. We started work on our next game, which was a superhero action game called The Incredible Crispin. As we were about to finish making The Incredible Crispin, the lab folks finished researching the ability for us to make our own hardware. When they finished the research, Joe let us know that we were able to open our own hardware lab for $5 million if we wanted. I took the deal. Our hardware lab would let us make our own game consoles. The hardware lab operated in a pretty similar way to the R&D lab. If we pumped money in each month, people would show up and work. I didn't do that just yet though. I went for another achievement by making a game and naming it Star Citizen. The poster on the wall there kinda looks like the Star Citizen logo, right? And sure enough, once we released the game, we got the achievement, The Sky is Not the Limit. And then immediately after that, another one came through. That was 2 achievements back to back. If I'm honest, I didn't find the Easter eggs myself. Like you guys saw, I tried to make some games that I thought would be Easter eggs, but they didn't work. So a guide helped me know what to name the Easter egg games. At this point in the game, we had also crossed 1 million fans. Could it be that fame was not going to fill the void in my soul? Surely not. We started working on our own console for the first time. We called it the Strybox. This was our most expensive endeavor so far, costing a chill $111 million. And that's on top of the monthly $3 million we need to spend on the crew actually making it. As our lab folks were working on our console, I decided to make Joe our engine specialist. Do you remember the sliders that pop up when developing a game? I could train myself and each of my employees to specialize in one of those areas. I had also decided to have Ubisoft focus on action games primarily, meaning that I wanted to train my employees to specialize in areas that behooved the action genre, since not all of the sliders were needed. Before I could have my employees, other than Joe or myself, specialize in anything though, we needed to train, so I leaned into that for a bit. Before too long, we could have Heather specialize in gameplay. After Heather had finished training, I eventually got a message from the hardware lab. They were nearly done with our console and were wondering if I wanted to announce it or not. I announced it. We had Christina specialize in sound. We released the Strybox and started making money. With the release though, we also learned something new. With getting our consoles out into the world, some of them would need to be fixed. Our lab team would fix the consoles provided they had the funding. If they didn't have enough money, the backlog of consoles needing to be fixed would increase, and people would be unhappy. So as time would go, you'd be able to see the consoles that needed fixing right here. $3 million a month though was enough funding, so the lab folks were able to stay on top of it. And after this amount of time spent not making actual games, we got back to the grind and made a horror game called Girthy Man. A strat that I found was to let them cook on the game a bit after they debug it, to try and squeeze in every last drop of tech and design points as we could. Even with the cooking, it wasn't our clean 10 game. We had Eric become our graphics person, and Sean became our level design person. We then made a new game engine called The Step Up. We then made our next game, which was a Ninja's Creed sequel called Ninja's Creed 5 Division. With this game, I also disabled features that weren't needed. Previously, I hadn't given much thought to the features side of things, but I eventually started to really keep it in mind. We finished the game and the reviews came in. Unfortunately, it was not our clean 10 game, but it was still a banger that ended up making us $175 million. Also, before Ninja's Creed 5 went off the market, I trained myself to specialize in world design. It wouldn't benefit us too very much, but it is what it is. At long last, after training for about 75 IRL business years, Kathy was able to specialize in artificial intelligence. Pretty much as soon as she was done training, we made our next game engine, which was called called the upper tier. We eventually started our next game. We were under 400 mil again at this point, once again getting a humbling taste of abject poverty. With Call of War 2, we could assign every one of our specialists to their rightful spots. We released it to great reviews, but still not a clean 10. We went for another achievement, another Easter egg achievement. I would never have gotten this one without the guide, Okami. The poster on the wall was supposed to be the giveaway, but I would not have picked that up. At this point in our career making this game, I am probably around 80 years old, by the way, and we got the achievement once we released the game. We started our next game engine, which was going to be called Platinum, and it only cost us $7 million. We then made our next game called Cyber Hunt: The Next Brainwave. It was our next almost clean 10 game. We then started our next console called the Stryvver 360. It set us back close to 140 mil, putting us ever closer to only being able to afford ramen noodles. We got our next achievement after making a game called Halo, a title that would never work in the real world. We released the Stryvver 360 right as we were finishing our next game, Road Fighter 2. Road Fighter 2 was not anywhere close to the clean 10 game we needed. Despite not getting the clean 10 game, we were once again a good distance from a ramen-only diet. We then made Swindler's Nap, which was also a disappointment. And then we made a game called Pirates Cove for a publisher's deal. After Pirates Cove was selling for a while, we learned that we really didn't need to do publisher deals because we had a big enough fan base. I would proceed to never again do another publisher's deal with Ubisoft. We then made our next game engine, which was called Bleeding Edge. Eventually, we researched the ability to boost all of the employees as well as myself. Boosting essentially just, well, boosts the output of the person for a duration of time, so it helps you work more quickly. We made Ninja's Creed 6 Syndication, a time travel game called Tenet, a medieval game called Chivalry. I think I forgot at the time that Chivalry is an actual real-life game franchise, which were all failures critically when it comes to being clean 10 games. We then made Call of War 3, which also was not a clean 10 game, but still did all right. Oh, we have an 11 out of 10. It meant that we just got an achievement that, to my knowledge, really was up to chance. So I was quite jazzed to get that one out of the way. We then went on to make our first MMO, Off the Rails Online. Remember when I said that MMOs were an exception to the rule that games were taken off the market after a certain amount of time? MMOs certainly were unique in that way. And that fact, the fact that I could just let a game ride on forever if I wanted, would prove to not be as positive of a thing as it may sound. You see, MMOs need regular maintenance, which would cost money, which is the red you see there. And the green is the sales the game is making. Things look okay now, but maybe keep an eye on that graph as time goes on. We made our next game, which was a racing game called Need for Quickness, lowered the R&D lab's budget because we didn't have anything to research, and then we started our first expansion for Off the Rails Online, which was called Shop Snatcher. I thought making an expansion for an MMO would be a relatively quick thing, but it genuinely was like making an entirely new game. And see the graph? We released the expansion and it was the worst thing we'd ever made. We immediately started our next game, which was called Galactic Conquest, because I wanted to make a moneymaker after what we just did. As we were making the game, I took the MMO off the market. Unfortunately, the game we were making, Galactic Conquest, wasn't that great of a game itself. We then made Hearts of Steel 2, which was mid. I lowered the budget of the hardware lab. We made Cyberpunk 4077, which also was mid. I trained everybody a bit, and then we made Cash Wolf 7, and the reviews came back great, despite not being a clean 10, meaning that training was incredibly important to making critically impactful games. We then made several new games. We made Wizard Age, a horror game called Loud Mouth Bound, and a racing game called Blazing Wheels. After those games, we settled into a routine to try and attain our clean 10 game. I was going to train people in between games and then make sequels to our games that weren't super recent. This is how it went. We made Ninja's Creed Genesis, Call of War 4 Modern Battle, and then, when those games didn't do super well, I decided to greenlight our next console. The Strybox 3 was put into development. We then jumped into our next game, which was Road Fighter 3 Road Warrior, and then, after that game, we opened up our R&D department again. We eventually released our Strybox 3, which started earning us some fresh cheese. We then made Swindlers, Shut-Eye, Chivalry 2, and then I got an idea. I could make a game on an older game engine simply for the purpose of then making a sequel game on a newer game engine. And then hopefully that game would be a clean 10 game. Because the ratings, don't quote me on this, are based at least a bit upon the previous game in the franchise. If the first game was made on a piddly game engine with no features, it'd make like some tech and design points, but not a lot. But if you then make a game that's a sequel to that one and make it with a great game engine and a bunch of features and even make it a large game versus a medium or small one, it'd have a chance to make way more points, thereby probably earning better ratings. Our first game with this idea was Superman. We then made a zombie game called The Strolling Dead. Markman was our next game, an assassin game. After Markman, we made our own version of Dune. Boon. We then made Cash Wolf 8. We then started making another new console, not super long after we made the Strybox 3. We called it the Strybox 1080. Our next game was called Alien Imprisonment, a cooking game. Just kidding. Then we made Bank Heist, and after that we made a post-apocalyptic game called Unity. Unity, not Division. Get it? We then started making yet another console, the Strybox 3080. Our next game was Wizard Age Origins. The game after Wizard Age Origins was kind of a test. We were going to make a sequel to Crash Bandicoot, Crash Bandicoot 2. Crash Bandicoot 1 came out 100 years ago in the game, so it definitely had not been made with a new engine or a bunch of new features or anything. So this was going to be a solid test for our theory about sequels to games made with old engines. While we did get a 9, it didn't prove our theory totally true. We made a new game engine called Bleeding Edge 2. We then made Superman Man of Iron, and this was going to be on our Bleeding Edge 2 engine. So it was going to be a huge leap technologically speaking from the first game. The reviews are in. Hold. Hold. We now had our clean 10 game. Despite Crash Bandicoot 2 not performing how we would have liked, our theory bore fruit with Superman. We then made The Strolling Dead, The Long Walk. As we were wrapping up The Strolling Dead, The Long Walk, I discovered that we could have our hardware lab do a thing I hadn't seen before. I didn't really know what this was at the time, but basically anytime we made a AAA game, which The Strolling Dead, The Long Walk was, we could have our hardware lab folks make custom hardware products to coincide with the release of the game. Not entirely sure what these sorts of products would be, but them making the hardware helped the hype of the game. So, The Strolling Dead, The Long Walk was also a big game for us, because it was the first game to break 1,000 hype. We were able to hit 2 conventions with it. Conventions really helped the hype of games. We then made the Bleeding Edge 3 game engine, and then we started making the Stry System 1. We then made Undercooked 2, and then we undertook, see what I did there, our second MMO, Call of War Online. Online. It wasn't like the best reviewed game, but I had an idea. You remember Boon? That was made on an older game engine, and it was just waiting for a juicy, technologically advanced sequel. After training our people, we started on the game. Do you remember something else I have to do to get this game done 100%? I would have to sell 100 million copies of a game without help from any publishers. At this point, we were sitting at just north of 18 million fans, with just over $1 billion in the bank. So that's where we were sitting when we were making Boon. Call of War Online wasn't really shaping up to be the guy, so maybe Boon would be the Lisan al-Gaib.
Listen, Al-Gaib!
We had 100 million copies to sell. We took Call of War Online offline. We made over $500 million off of it. But now we had to keep Boon afloat. Boon was going to be our golden goose. We made Band Wars. We then decided to make another MMO, one that would hopefully keep the boat afloat as Boon kept chugging. We made Road Fighter Online. You know how I said I would never hype another game? I had actually forgotten, but well, I hyped this one as well. After we got the reviews for Road Fighter Online, I saw that we were down to 700 mil. We were losing money. We needed 20 million more copies of Boon to sell. I closed down the R&D lab and the hardware lab. We made a game called Alien Expectation. See that red? That's not a good red. Do you remember how I defunded the hardware lab entirely? Remember how consoles still need to be fixed? Time went on and we were bleeding money. Boon was eventually costing us over $15 million by itself a month to be kept alive. And finally, with under $100 million left in the bank, being just a bit over 15 million copies shy of our goal, I had to bite the bullet and take it off the market in order to save the business. I eventually gave the hardware lab some funding because I had seen our console backlog. I took Road Fighter Online off the market. So just to recap, I had hyped the MMO that assisted in the downfall of our golden goose game. Just gonna leave that there. We made a new game called Battleland, but I realized I had forgotten to put it on an old engine, so I binned the game. Our console backlog eventually got back to a good place. After binning Battleland, we made Robert the Robber, and that one was on an old engine. We then made Bank Heist 2, which actually wasn't the same genre as Robert the Robber. Crime and Thief, totally different. Bank Heist 2 was able to help us at least somewhat recover from my multi-million dollar blunder. We then made some new IPs that we could then upgrade later. Those games were Beast Mode, Shadow Splinter, Immortal Violence, Game of Crowns, Warlocks and Wizards, and Starscape. We then tried to make some big money and make a Swindlers game. Our final Swindlers game, Swindlers Infinite Redemption, was born. Our third clean 10 game. At this point, we were a bit over $350 million in the bank, but that amount would soon grow, thanks to Swindlers Infinite Redemption, the perfect swan song to the franchise. In order for us to sell 100 million copies of a game, we had to build up enough capital to afford having an MMO on the market for a long enough amount of time. We made the Stry System 2, the Bleeding Edge 4 game engine, Battleland, Chivalry 3 The Final Bout, Cash Wolf 9 Cash Pack, Wizard Age Revenant, another new system called the Stry System 3, a game called Cubes, and then after all that, we were sitting at over $2 billion and close to 80 million fans. We then made another MMO, Unity Online. The game slapped just like Boon. We got the Stry System 4 going. Before too long, Unity Online was halfway to 100 million. We were making our next game, Battleland 2 Good Company, when...
Yes!
Give me the achievement.
Yes!
Unobtainium!
We had hit the mark. Unity Online crossed 100 million units. We were successful enough at that point that we were actually more wealthy than when we had started the game. And we had over 110 million fans. Us getting the achievement with Unity Online actually went more quickly than I had thought. I thought it was going to be more stressful based on how Boone went. But we had amassed such wealth and had so many fans that we got it relatively easily with Unity Online. We released Battleland 2 Good Company, made Living the game, and then finally we made a dance game called Night Fever. We had done it. We had close to 150 million fans. Could easily earn billions of dollars. Unity Online made us over $2 billion over the course of its life. And yet, I felt empty. Why was I not satisfied? Why did it feel like money and fame were just vanity and a chasing after wind? I hadn't totally completed the game yet. Maybe finishing the 100% would help me find my worth. Maybe achievements could do what money and fame couldn't. We started a new company. Now, things start to get a little hairy here, so bear with me. The goal was to start a company and then finish the game in pirate mode, which was a harder mode of the game. I turned pirate mode on and we made Pirate Port Games. This screen right here honestly is still a bit confusing to this day. Unlock hints. Would me hitting yes mean that I would not get brand new hints? I hit yes. We started making a game with this new company, but quickly learned that we had retained our knowledge gained while in Newbiesoft. And that didn't feel right to me if we were trying to beat the game on the harder mode, so we started again. And here's where I screwed up big time. I named it Pirate Port Games again, which was a mistake itself, you'll see why later, and didn't unlock any hints. But you know what I didn't do? I did not turn on pirate mode. So this was just another standard game. But I didn't know this. So we started making games with this company, and I continued being clueless. We cranked out the games. We eventually got our next achievement though by naming a game Pong while in the garage. Whoa! Whoa! We moved to our new office. Now, let me try my best to explain the series of events that then happened. I had 4 more achievements to get that had to do with naming games specific things. I was intending to do that, but 2 of the 4 achievements needed to be done in our new office before we renovated the place. I didn't know that and went ahead with the remodel, which screwed things up. What I ultimately did was I loaded up a fresh company that I had made previously for the purpose of getting an achievement. I was gonna try to fly through the garage phase, get to the new office, get those 2 achievements, then go back to our Pirate Port Games company, which I still thought was on pirate mode. After some time grinding out games, we were able to get to the new office. We made Doom to get one of the 2 achievements we needed to get here, and then we eventually made Wing Commander to get the second one. We then got back into Pirate Port Games and I continued on, but I was a bit confused. One of the achievements we had left would be achieved by getting to the first office after the garage in pirate mode. We had obviously moved out of the garage but got no such achievement. We made a game called Theme Hospital to get one of our last naming achievements, and then we made Half-Life to get the final Easter egg achievement. We had 2 achievements left and they were both related to pirate mode. I soon made the discovery that on the load game screen, one of our saves had this pirate symbol on it. Remember the first time I made Pirate Port Games? When I hit yes on that dang hint screen? That first one was in pirate mode. Our current company, which was also called Pirate Port Games, was not in pirate mode. Having 2 companies with the same name, but one in pirate mode and one not in pirate mode, threw me off. I continued with this current company, but eventually, at long last, I made another discovery. We had no copy protection. Copy protection was something in pirate mode, according to the all-knowing internet. We made yet another new company, and on the load game screen, that company did have the pirate symbol. After gaining this knowledge, I wanted an entirely clean slate. I made what I thought would be our final company, Pirate Tavern Games. This company was on pirate mode. We started making games. We were making our third game when I got a piece of mail. Oh, it is not selling. Uh-oh. What's this mail? It's too expensive, so I pirated it. This was it. This was pirate mode at long last. Beating this mode would fulfill me. Shortly later, we were given the option to sell a percentage of our company for a lump sum, something that did not happen in the normal game. I did not take the deal. The bank came with another deal for me. I did take that deal. We made more games. Another offer came in for shares of our company. I took that deal as well. Money was such a bigger deal in pirate mode. We eventually were able to research copy protection. We researched it immediately. The bank was about to take its money back, but I was able to sell more of the company, thereby pulling us from the brink. The bank took their money and we were in the hole again. I accidentally released a game with no name. Pirate mode was stressful, shall we say. Yet another offer came in for the shares of the company. I took the deal again. Despite continuing to make games, we still slipped back into the red. The bank finally showed up. I took the deal. We continued to get stupid mail from pirates. I really enjoyed your game, Gunslingers, but other action are more innovative, so I stole it. We couldn't afford to make a game engine with copy protection capabilities. We made a banger of a game called Space Pirates, ironically. We made a game engine with copy protection. As we were about to finish the engine, we learned that given the funds, we'd be given the opportunity to buy back a chunk of our company that we had sold. I declined the deal at that point. We made our next game with the new engine. The bank eventually took their money and we survived. I got a message from somebody who was not a fan of our new copy protection. Hey, what's up, dude? Hate how inconvenient the copy protection is. Can you please not use it in the future? What, because you're going to pirate it, Alexander? How about you suck a brick, buddy? Suck brick, kid! I learned that 92% of players had pirated one of our past games. 8% of the player base paid us. That was why we needed that dang copy protection. Unfortunately, I learned that despite our new game engine having copy protection, that technology would not be, watertight against pirates. Pirates would still find ways to get the games, even with the copy protection. We continued making games. Bob the Builder popped off and set us up financially, which was fantastic. I soon learned that we'd be able to research copy protection v2. So basically what would happen would be that new versions of copy protection would come out and we would need to continue to make game engines with the most up-to-date copy protection after we researched it in order to most effectively protect our games. I was eventually given the option to buy back our company's shares again, and I took the deal this time. We released another banger, and after releasing Land Grabbers, we were given the option to move. We moved and got the achievement at long last. Now the only achievement we had left was to finish the game. We made a new game engine with copy protection version 2. We started making games in the new office. We just cranked out the games. I eventually bought back some of our company that we'd sold. We made yet another new game engine with copy protection v3. We got back to making games. After a bit, I was able to buy back the final shares for our company, giving us full and complete ownership once again. I eventually researched copy protection version 4, but I didn't quite take note of the price tag that came with it. We weren't dead yet. However, we were soon back in the red after getting out of it for a moment. We were in the red, but I didn't sell some of the company. The bank offered a loan. I took the deal. The bank came for their money quick, and we were deep in the red. I got the option to sell some of the company, and I took the deal. And later on, I sold yet more of the company. I sold even more of the company. And then even more. At this point, I'm not sure how much of the company I actually owned. We continued making games, and we'd make some money, but we'd also lose money so very fast. Some people came to me asking for the source code of one of our game engines, and this time I decided to sell it. It turned out to be totally not worth it though, because we didn't even make $3,000 off of it, and we lost 200 fans. So I never did that again. Soon we were back to under 100K in the bank. We continued making games. I was really feeling the cost of just making games. Games cost money to even start, and then we'd have to pay more money at each stage of production, and that's on top of the ongoing monthly costs we had, which at this point was $77,000. Eventually the bank showed up again with another loan for some weird reason. I took the deal. I had to take the deal. Games continued being made. The bank came and took their $400,000, which sunk us deep into the hole. Then they came right back and offered us another loan. I took the deal. We continued to burn through money. We needed to pay the bank around $1 million, and we were in the hole, and we were struggling to make any money. The bank came with yet another loan. So at this point, we were loan stacking. The bank came and took their money from the earlier loan, putting us in the hole close to $1 million. Then they turned around and offered us a $1.6 million loan. I took the deal. The bank took their money for the second loan that we had. So we were back to only having one loan with the bank. You tracking with me? Well, the bank came for their $1.6 million when I had $78,000 in the bank, and that did us in. Pirate Tavern Games went bankrupt, but we weren't done. We had one more achievement. We started a new company and turned on pirate mode. We named the company Walk the Plank Games. Unfortunately, hot on the heels of failure, naming myself slipped my mind. So, the CEO of this company was simply called Player. We got right to work. We banged out games. I started getting mail from pirates. I sold some of the company. I got more pirate mail. I sold more of the company. I eventually got an offer to sell even more of the company, but I declined it as we were about to sell a game. I declined to sell more of the company. Again, I declined to sell more of the company. We got to the point where I actually decided to buy back some of the company. I was playing a bit better this time around. We eventually worked up a decent nest egg in the garage. We kept grinding out the game. We researched, we made game reports, we did the work. Our financial situation was much more stable this time. The pirating issue was much less of a plague to me this time around. We made 2 bangers in a row. We were sent over $1 million and soon had over $4 million. We soon made yet another banger, which sent us to $6 million. At this point, we had to survive 25 years to finish the game. We kept up the grind. We didn't move to the new office for a bit. I wanted to have a fat stack in the bank. When we were 16 years into the life of the company and we had over $11 million in the bank is when I decided to make the move. I was scared to move, but we continued on. We hired 2 new people onto the team based off a strat I saw online. We kept grinding. We managed our time. We trained our people. We kept making games. The time ticked by. I gave the okay to remodel the office during the 20th year of the company. 15 years left. More games were made. 10 years left. We made more games. 5 years left. We made another hire, and then we moved to the final office. We continued working. On year 33, we crossed $100 million on pirate mode. We filled out the office with new employees. On year 35, our final year, I decided we should take Walk the Plank Games to G3 for the very first time. And boy, did we show up. Number 1! That was our first time showing up and we were number 1 there, dude. I love that so much. And finally, at the very, very end of the 35th year of Walk the Plank Games, Player was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award. Our final score with Nubisoft was 38,870,861. And Walk the Plank Games' score was more than that. And the achievement came through. We had 100% 100%ed Game Dev Tycoon. But why? All the money, all the fame, that didn't fill me up. And the 100% itself, that felt empty as well. Is there more to this life than money, fame, and achievement? Is there anything meaningful under the sun? You know what? I'm gonna take my DeLorean and go further back in time to try to find a super wise dude who can tell me what's actually meaningful in life. Maybe he'll be a king. Maybe he even wrote a book or two. Who knows? Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any prayer requests, please feel free to post in the comments below. I'd love to know how I can be praying for you guys. Love God, love people, and I'll see you guys soon.